I'm Executive Editor Michael Johnson. New York State is one of only 2 states that charges 16 and 17-year-olds as adults when it comes to criminal cases. In 2012, 2,700 youths were sent to prisons. And this year, Governor Cuomo has made easing penalties on 16 and 17-year-olds a top priority. Now, Assembly Democrats have historically been supportive of this measure. Where it's failed is with Senate Republicans. This week, a conservative advocate came to Albany and is now in New York City to talk to lawmakers about Senate Republicans specifically about the conservative argument for raising the age of criminal responsibility. That person's Marc Levin, and he's joining me now. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And you are the director of the Center for Effective Justice and the policy director for Right on Crime. And Right on Crime is the advocacy group that focuses on these issues. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, we began in Texas at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is the state's leading conservative think tank. In 2005, I came on board, started our criminal justice program. We began looking at the prison system, what programs worked, what programs didn't, what we could do in terms of things like drug courts, which Texas has done now and been able to close 3 prisons and 6 juvenile lockups. What we could do to hold offenders accountable, hold the system accountable for results, and also not be too tough on taxpayers. So with regard to the age of juvenile jurisdiction here in New York, it's a great opportunity to do something that's good for families, that's going to reduce recidivism, because we know that kids reoffend at a lower rate when they're in the juvenile system. And so it's really exciting for us at Right on Crime, and so folks know, Right on Crime, we started that in 2010 to basically take some of the success we had in Texas on criminal justice reform nationally. We have a statement of principles that's signed by Newt Gingrich, Jeb Bush, Bill Bennett, the former drug czar, Ed Meese, former Attorney General, Grover Norquist, a whole range of George Kelling, who helped design the broken windows policing here in New York City. So it's a real strong platform in terms of how conservatives should address criminal justice issues.
So it's interesting to me because it seems like when it comes to criminal justice reform, it's always coming from the left. When you approached it, were you expecting to come to different results, or did you kind of think that there was always some kind of problem there as far as the conservative approach of like more prison cells is the best way to deal with criminals?
Well, we really felt like both the left and some people on the right had gotten this issue wrong. If you start going back to really the 60s, there was this sentiment on the left, at least the radical portions of the left, that, society causes crime and we shouldn't really hold individuals too responsible. And there was, I think, some Pollyannish views that we didn't need prisons much at all, when in fact we know we do need them, especially for violent and dangerous offenders, that they do one thing well, that's keep people segregated from society. But by the same token, some people on the right had kind of thought prisons were the solution for every problem. And in fact, we've learned a lot since then, and we have a lot of new tools, whether it's electronic monitoring, actuarial risk assessments to match offenders with the right program, new medications for treating mental illness and addiction. So things have changed. And the other thing that changed is from the early 70s to the mid-2000s, incarceration rate went up 5-fold in this country. And so we swept in a lot of nonviolent and low-risk offenders into the system. Now, thankfully, on the juvenile side, over the last 15 to 20 years, 40% reduction now in juvenile incarceration. And I think that this raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction, it's something that Connecticut did a few years ago, and since that time they've had lower recidivism among 16 and 17-year-olds. The other real big thing is for the families, that if it's your 16-year-old, and remember the average high school graduation age is 18, so most of them are living at home with their parent, you're not notified, you don't have a right to participate in court proceedings, whereas if they're a juvenile, you do. So that's a critical component of it as well.
And do you feel like, well, before we get into New York State, can you recap a couple of places where you've worked, where this has worked, where you've gone into states and maybe made the case that, from a conservative perspective, made the case that raising the age to 18, but also just in general, like a different approach on criminal justice is a better approach?
Sure. Well, of course, Connecticut is one, but then also New Hampshire raised the age just last year, and it was a unanimous vote there in the legislature, and the Senate is controlled by Republicans there at that time as well. So currently, Wisconsin, North Carolina are looking at raising the age. Obviously, North Carolina is the only other state where 16-year-olds are treated as adults, and the sponsor there, the legislation, is a Tea Party Republican, Marilyn Avila, in the House. And so we've gone there and briefed the legislature there as well. So more broadly, a lot of states have taken major reforms in the adult and juvenile area. Of course, Texas and Ohio, Georgia, and one of the really significant things from a political perspective perspective is, Governor Nathan Deal in Georgia campaigned. He sent out a mail piece saying he had reduced incarceration by 20%. He's a former prosecutor, former judge. Governor Kasich has campaigned on this issue in black churches and in the suburbs. So it used to be seen as kind of a 10-foot pole. You didn't want to be seen as soft on crime, but what we're showing is you can be both tough and smart on crime and actually focus on getting results. And one of the reasons, the juvenile system works better is they work with the family. A lot of the best juvenile justice programs, someone comes in the home a few times a week and helps that family. It's often a single mother. Have the right boundaries, the right supervision for that child. And, as a conservative, if you have stronger families, you need less government. So that's a big part of it.
And getting to New York State, I know in the past the biggest, hindrance to criminal justice reform at large and also to raising the age has been in suburbs. There's a concern from suburban families that this would make you look soft on crime. And then also in upstate New York, there was a lot of prisons up there and there was a lot of jobs that were associated with those prisons. As you met with lawmakers, what did you say to them to kind of change their focus and maybe see your point of view a little bit?
Yeah, actually, it turns out it's a fairly easy sell with this one because the serious violent crimes would still start out in adult court under the recommendations from the commission, which had prosecutors and law enforcement, and it was unanimous. So that helps on that issue. There's actually some people on the left in the assembly who are wild about that. So, but I think this was a balanced document that the commission produced. And then the other thing is there's actually $110 million for capital expenses for perhaps creating more beds. Now, the states that have done this, it's turned out they haven't needed a lot of the beds that were projected. But that said, it's possible some of the juvenile facilities that have been closed, or even some of the adult ones, could be converted into juvenile facilities. So some of the legislators from upstate New York, there's actually a potential attraction there, but I really don't think that's the reason to do it. But that I think it was kind of good in a conservative way for the governor to include this in the budget so that obviously when 16 and 17-year-olds do commit those offenses that are serious enough, and they also, will use the risk assessment to see, okay, is the family, in most instances, the family is a key part of rehabilitating, but in some cases, you have a family that's part of the same gang, and the kid does need to be in a residential setting to properly rehabilitate them. So that's all built into this.
And that gets me to prison reform and that topic. And I think what you're kind of getting at there is that 16 and 17-year-olds need to be separated from other adult populations when possible. And just in general, younger convicts need to be separated from maybe like older hardened criminals.
Right.
And how have you advocated for that or made that change in other states throughout their time at the on Right for Crime, but also just at the Center for Effective Justice?
Yes, actually, it's interesting. There's a federal Prison Rape Elimination Act, and what it's required for many years is that those underage and 16 and 17-year-olds are considered juveniles under federal law, that they be separated. Now, what was new about a year ago is new guidelines in there requiring that they can't just be put in solitary confinement. They have to be given programming, age-appropriate programming, educational and otherwise. And that's a huge cost for county jails, not only at Rikers Island, but even more so in the rural areas where you may only have one or two 16 and 17-year-olds in their jail. So having them go to juvenile detention, which would happen under this if they are arrested and taken into custody, is far better in terms of complying with federal law and actually will, I think, have lower costs for the counties. I think that, as you said, the research is strong that when you put in a 16 or 17-year-old in with hardened adult offenders, you actually increase recidivism. By the way, you have a huge risk of suicide and sexual abuse during that time in custody with the older offenders.
And during your conversations with Senate Republicans, do you get a sense that that they are amiable to this type of change and this type of recommendations that came from the commission?
Yes, I think so. I think that there were some practical questions raised, which I think are being addressed or have been addressed, but I didn't detect kind of an ideological resistance to this. I think that, frankly, one of the challenges was with the Close to Home initiative, which I think has been very successful, a lot of the discussion around that spotlighted a number of problems at the Department of Children and Family Services and in those facilities. And just like there are a ton of problems with Rikers Island, any government facility that has people in custody, whether it's on the civil side in terms of civil mental health facilities or criminal side, there's going to be problems. Obviously, better management and practices of classifying those inmates or residents appropriately can help address those, having appropriate staffing ratios. But so it is hard for some people to get their arms around that this might lead to some additional juvenile beds. So just because they know all the problems that have accompanied that agency. But I think certainly there'll be some scrutiny on, okay, we're going to have these beds, maybe we ought to have a nonprofit manage it, maybe we need better performance measures for the Office of Children and Family Services and so forth. So I think it's the concerns were more of a broader issue of how do we make this agency more accountable.
Gotcha. Marc Levin from Right on Crime Policy Director, thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks.